Ladies and gentlemen, the most persistent ghost in your home isn't found in the attic. You see, it is the silent echo of your past, dictating every decision you make today. It is a weight we carry into every single room, a shadow that colors the way we see our partners, our careers, and even our own worth. Have you ever wondered, why a small passing comment from a person you love or a minor setback at work triggers a reaction that feels, completely disproportionate? Why does a simple "we need to talk" feel like a final judgment? Or a moment of criticism feel like a total collapse of your identity? Calmly. In those moments, your heart races and your walls go up. But if you look closely, you'll realize the threat. It isn't actually in the room with you. The truth is, many of us are not living in the present. We are living in a museum of our own history. Every hallway of our minds is lined with the artifacts of our childhood, the relics of old heartbreaks, and the dusty portraits of who we were told we had to be. We walk through our daily lives reacting to these old displays, convinced that the world today is the same world that hurt us yesterday. But you were never meant to be a static object in your own life. Encouragingly, today we begin the work of shifting your role. We are going to learn how to stop being the exhibit and start being the curator. It is time to decide which parts of your history deserve a place on the wall, and which ones, belong in the archives. Because to move forward, we must face a haunting possibility. What if your most painful triggers are actually trying to save a version of you that no longer exists? Think about that. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt like you were fighting a battle that had already ended years ago? There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being at war with your own reactions. It is the weight of unseen chains. You wake up with the best of intentions, promising yourself that today will be different, that you will be calm, centered, and present. Yet, the moment a specific trigger is pulled, that version of you simply evaporates. Suddenly, you aren't the person you've worked so hard to become, right? You are a passenger in your own body, watching from behind a glass pane as an older, more wounded version of yourself takes the wheel. Perhaps you become sharp and defensive over a minor critique, or perhaps you shut down entirely, retreating into a silence so heavy it feels like stone. The most painful part of this experience isn't the reaction itself, but the shame that follows it. You sit in the wreckage of an argument, or the coolness of a withdrawn evening, asking yourself, why did I do that again? I know better than this. This is the philosophical frustration of the modern mind. You see, we possess the intellectual map of where we want to go, but we are being pulled back by an invisible gravity. It's as if your nervous system is a house built on a fractured foundation. No matter how much you paint the walls or change the furniture, the floorboards still creak in the same places every time you try to move forward. You are overreacting in a vacuum. Not at all. You are responding to the ghosts that still inhabit your hallways. You are exhausted because you aren't just living your life. You are carrying the weight of every version of you that didn't feel safe, didn't feel seen, or didn't feel enough. We often view these triggers as flaws, as glitches in our personality that need to be deleted. But we must realize that these reactions are actually the architecture of our own survival. We don't banish these ghosts to be rid of them. No, we study them to understand why our soul felt it necessary to build these walls in the first place. Because once you understand the design of the cage, you begin to realize that the door has been unlocked this entire time. However, there is one detail about these unseen chains that most people miss, and it is the very reason why your past refuses to stay in the past. Ladies and gentlemen, the detail we often overlook, the really crucial detail, is the true identity of the ghost itself. We treat our trauma and our triggers like unwanted intruders, but the reality is, it's far more poignant than that. These ghosts are actually frozen fragments of your younger self, trapped in a moment of time where the world felt unsafe. Think of it this way. Your brain is an incredibly sophisticated survival machine, but it's also, you see, a meticulous archivist. When you experienced a moment of pain, rejection, or fear years ago, your brain drew a map. Firmly, that map was designed to keep you safe from a specific danger that existed then. It was a brilliant piece of navigation for a child trying to survive a storm, right? The problem, however, is that while you have grown, moved, and evolved, that fragment of your consciousness is still holding that same old map, trying to navigate a modern world that no longer looks like the forest where you were once lost. When you feel an irrational surge of anger, or a paralyzing wave of anxiety in a situation that seems harmless to others, you are being haunted by a monster. You are witnessing a traveler from your past who has arrived in your present. This younger version of you is looking at your current life through a lens of ancient survival. They are shouting danger, not because there is a fire in the room today, but because they are still standing in the smoke of a fire from 20 years ago. Your brain isn't trying to sabotage your happiness, you know? It is trying to protect a child who is no longer in danger. Ladies and gentlemen, the haunting doesn't end when you try to exorcise these memories or push them into the basement of your mind. In fact, the more you fight them, the louder they scream to be heard. True peace begins when you stop running and finally invite these fragments to sit at the table with you. It begins when you look at your own triggers with curiosity instead of shame. When you realize that you are no longer the helpless child in the story, but the one who now holds the keys to the entire house, the dynamic shifts. You can look at that frightened part of yourself and say, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but we are safe now. I can take it from here." This shift from fear to compassion is the bridge between simply surviving and truly living. But even once we invite these fragments to the table, there is a final, more complex layer to this architecture that we must address. Because sometimes the maps we carry weren't even drawn by us, and there was one specific room in this house that holds a secret about your lineage you never asked to inherit.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we step into the deeper, inherited shadows of that room, we must first equip ourselves with the tools, the actual tools, to navigate the ghosts we already know. To reclaim the halls of your own mind, you must move from passive observation to active intervention. You see, this begins with a process I call the audit. The audit is the practice of monitoring the climate of your own reactions. We have all experienced moments, haven't we? Where a minor disagreement with a partner feels like a catastrophic abandonment, or a small critique from a boss feels like a total erasure of our worth. In these moments, the emotional response is, it's disproportionate. If the reaction feels too big for the room, it's because it isn't actually happening in the room. It is a haunting. The audit requires you to stop right in the heat of the moment and recognize that your current environment hasn't owned this level of distress. Firmly, once you have identified this mismatch, you must initiate the dialogue. This is a single, piercing internal question that cuts through the fog of your survival instincts. How old do I feel? Right now. Gently. When you ask this, ladies and gentlemen, do not look for a logical answer. Look for a felt sense. You might be 35 years old, standing in a modern office, but realize that the crushing weight in your chest, it feels exactly like you did when you were 7, waiting for a parent who never showed up. Deeply. By identifying the age of the feeling, you pinpoint exactly which ghost has taken the wheel. You realize that it isn't the adult version of you who is terrified. No, it is a younger, frozen fragment of your past. Empathetically. This brings us to the final and most vital step. Active integration. This is the conscious act of speaking to that younger version with the authority and the compassion of the adult you have become today. Softly. It is not about dismissing the fear, but about repositioning who is in charge of the house. You must internally address that younger self and say, compassionately, I see why you're afraid. I remember this pain, and I understand why you're trying to protect us. But I am the adult now. I have resources you didn't have then. I am safe, and I will take it from here, authoritatively. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the ultimate act of self-sovereignty. It is the moment you stop being a passenger to your trauma and start becoming the architect of your peace. You are essentially telling the ghost that while it may live in the house, it no longer holds the keys. But as we master the ghosts of our own making, we are forced to confront a darker reality. Because sometimes, even when we heal our own wounds, we find that the walls of our house are still vibrating with a frequency that doesn't belong to us. Reflectively, we have learned to manage our own past, but what do we do when the haunting is older than we are, low and thoughtful? There is one specific womb we have yet to unlock, the one that contains the ghosts we didn't create, but were born to carry, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, we often mistake healing for a form of, exorcism. Reflective. We think that if we work hard enough or wait long enough, we can banish the memories of our past entirely. Thoughtful. We expect to wake up in a house that is sterile, silent, and brand new, gently firm. But the architecture of the human mind, it simply does not work that way. With depth. To live in a house of light is not to live in a house without history. Softly. It is to live in a place where you finally recognize that the shadows you feared, they were never monsters. They were simply parts of yourself, waiting to be understood.
When you integrate your past rather than suppressing it, the atmosphere of your internal world shifts. The floorboards may still creak, and the old photographs may still hang on the walls, but the air is no longer heavy with the scent of stagnation. Integration means that a memory of failure no longer tells you that you are a failure. It simply tells you where you have been. A memory of heartbreak no longer warns you to stay cold. It reminds you of your capacity to feel. In this house of light, you are no longer a tenant living in fear of a landlord named trauma. Firmly, you are the master of your domain. Calmly, you decide which windows to open to the morning sun and which doors to keep locked for your own peace. Reflective, you realize that while you cannot change the blueprints of what happened yesterday, you are the only one with the power to renovate the experience of today. The past is a profound teacher, but it is a terrible master. With grace, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this journey of the soul through the hallways of the mind.
inviting. If you found peace in these words and wish to continue exploring the depths of your own inner landscape, please consider subscribing to Mindscapes Explored. Together, we can continue our walk toward the light. Before you leave this space today, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Share one ghost you are finally ready to talk to in the comments below. Let us acknowledge them together, and in doing so, we claim the rooms they have occupied for far too long.